3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Lightforge podcast, where we're going to talk about the Lightforge Arena tier list, which is a tier list that we have in case you didn't know. It's on www.thelightforge.com, and it is always updated whenever any changes to the meta happens, any new cards, nerfs, buffs, whatever. And it has been, God, this has been going on for like 4 years now or something, some really long time. Anyway, this is the preview for the Ashes of Outland. So we will go over every single card, their not necessarily final scores, because we released the final scores like a day before the expansion release. So that may change over the course of the next 24 hours before we release it. But they're pretty much going to be there. Like, it's going to be within a band of like 5 points or something as we tweak things a little bit further. But we're going to release basically the final scores, and we're going to discuss what makes each card good and bad, and how to play these cards, and how to have success in the arena with them, what to draft, what not to draft, right? Yeah, so that's this stream that we don't have a very good title for. It will be a stream, it will be a podcast, it will be a video on YouTube. So check out any of these sources for it. It will also be, as usual, like 8 hours long. This is
for those of you watching on Twitch and YouTube, wow, the quarantine hair is real. Yeah, we are incredibly disheveled and hairy right now.
So you're not allowed to get your hair cut, right? Like, they shut all the salons and like
barbers because they're non-essential. Right? They're non-essential. Okay. So you got to get clippers and do it yourself.
I just take that as the government telling us that we should not cut our hairs for our own hygiene.
Kind of, yeah. Look, we're dirty gamers. Just be glad the technology is not there yet for like smell-o-vision, right?
Whoa. I smell great, okay? It's that that perfect blend of having just taken a shower and already being a tiny bit sweaty, so there's a little bit of body odor, you don't just smell like soap. Perfect blend right now. This is the ideal ADWCTA to smell.
Body by ADWCTA. Definitely not coming anywhere near you because we're in quarantine. All right, let's review some cards.
Let's not review some cards yet. First, I actually realized I forgot to turn my air conditioner on. So I'm gonna go do that now.
Oh,
so that's a good reminder, about the whole sweatiness and stuff. I'm like, why am I sweating a little bit? I did just take a shower before the stream. Okay. Now that I have my air conditioner set on a normal temperature instead of what brand new my fiance prefers, which is like 76 degrees, by the way. I'm not crazy. She's crazy. Let's do this. Okay, so Ashes of Outland is a new expansion. This is how this is going to go. We are going to first talk about the overall meta, because there's also a rotation happening. And Arena's going to be standard again when Ashes of Outlands releases on Tuesday. So with the standard Arena, we're going to talk about how the meta is going to be. So that's the video number 1, which is this video. Video number 2 is going to be about the top neutral cards that are coming in and how that impacts the meta. Video number 3 is going to be about deeper cuts in the neutrals, like some cards you don't necessarily want to take into your deck, but it's Arena. There are no buckets. Like, you will end up taking these cards. And then we will go over every single class and their place in the meta, including a really long one on Demon Hunter. If you guys are listeners or viewers of the podcast normally, last week we already did a Demon Hunter one for all the basic and initiate cards. So we're not going to go over them again, but we will point you back to that podcast, which is Lightforge 242. And we'll definitely point you there again when the Demon Hunter one starts. So we just assume that you already know all the basic and initiate cards. It's for Demon Hunter, because they're evergreen cards, even though they haven't been added to the arena yet. So that's how this is going to go. Let's get into it. Let's start the talk. What's going to happen? Meta. I always give 4 things, before every meta I talk about 4 talking points on how the meta is going to be different and unique in the arena compared to previous metas. So this upcoming meta, the first thing that I want to talk about is that we are in standard. And again, if you're a listener of the Lightforge podcast, you know that I've been not asking for, but just kind of predicting that Arena is going to be standard for a rotation since the last rotation. I thought it was a very good time to end the Year of the Dragon on a standard rotation that has all the Year of the Dragon cards. They didn't do it. They're doing it now. And as I said before, and I'm going to continue saying this very easy prediction, which is that this will be the highest swing meta ever. We've had high swing metas before. you are not going to have seen anything like the high swinginess of this meta. And it is not because Ashes of Outlands is some ridiculous set that's going to come in and destroy everything, as I hear some people, talk about. But it really is because what everyone is talking about, which is that Year of the Dragon cards are still in. Year of the Dragon was the swingiest year, and we just never got it all together. And, Descent of Dragons is still in, all the other stuff is still in, your Twin Tyrants aren't leaving. It's just gonna swing. Do you have anything to add about the swinginess of this meta?
Yeah, so if you guys remember a year ago, more than a year ago, because it's been more than a year, older sets, sort of the meta-defining cards were something like Bog Creeper. Remember?
Oh
like
god, that was super
stated...
meta-defining. That changed everything when it was added.
It changed everything.
It was a gigantic taunt that was well statted.
It was gigantic taunt that was fair in stats, but had a good distribution and it had taunt. Those were the things going for it. It had a good distribution and it had taunt, and it came out on like a pretty decent turn that wasn't too late, and still gave you some value. Now, if Bog Creeper were to come out in this patch, we wouldn't even be talking about it in the first video in which we're going to highlight like the top 10, top 13 cards, because it just doesn't do enough. Like it's not well statted enough. It doesn't do enough. It doesn't swing the board. And if you're looking at just a big taunt, well, there's cards in these sets that give you literally double the amount of stats you're supposed to get if you factor in initiative and taunt. So that's sort of where we're at. And it will influence all the scores as well. Like, so this is just sort of like a PSA, a little bit of kind of, hold your horses here. Because when we go through all of these scores, once again, we've never had a meta such as this. We've always had a meta that was at least watered down with at least a set, like Old Gods, which was like very tame and very fair. No. Starting from Rise of Shadows, Blizzard said, screw fairness, we're going to go with fun. And fun is, in Blizzard's mind, very far away from fair. So what is going to end up happening is you might see a lot of scores and be like, no, this card is way better than a 120. And it would have been. It would have potentially have been like a 150-ish card if this were in like a meta a year and a half ago. Compared to something like Bog Creeper, compared to even old standbys like Boulderfist Ogre. God, how that card has fallen hard. But now a 120 card is 120 because of stupid cards, for example, like Varanus, right? Like in Hunters. Just like incredibly dumb, broken cards with zero drawback and upside that almost matches their innate mana cost, plus has a body on top of it. We're talking about these cards that are pulling the scores up, and because of that, you might be surprised at some cards, and you're like, wait, how is this only a 120? It's because of stupid OP cards flooding into the overall meta. So it's not just like Varanus in Hunter sort of pulling everything up. One card can't do that. It's all of these ridiculously swingy good cards, pulling everything, or really just, like creating this very high ceiling and then pushing everything down. So if you're not like a super premium, well, we do it relative, right? So is this anywhere close as good as a card, for example, like Varanus? No? All right, well, it's going to be lower.
Yeah, so, and a lot of the ways this is being pulled up by this kind of like power creep is in neutral, right? Everyone knows Twin Tyrant, everyone knows Rap Golem, everyone knows like Evasive Worm, Faceless Corruptor, right? Like these are all cards and they're all in the meta. And Ashes of Outlands, this is something that I think we'll get to when we talk about the neutral cards, but I'll just lay it out in the very beginning. Ashes of Outlands doesn't quite get there when it comes to their neutral cards. They're not Twin Tyrant level good. neutral cards, except one. So for the most part, they're not really not going to get they're not going to have the same meta impact as these old cards that are coming in. So keep that part in mind. And when we're talking about power creep, putting numbers behind the power creep, a Yeti normally, like more than before Year of the Dragon, was usually around like a 112. That was like your normal value for a Yeti, and we center the tier list by the average card you're being offered. So that's why each class is a different value for Yeti. Also, Yeti's not the same value in each class, but we also center it on the tier list. So Yeti's normally around a 112 in what I would consider the average meta. Sometimes it's a bit higher, sometimes it's a bit lower. It is now at the lowest it's ever been. I don't know what Yeti is exactly right now.
It's a 105.
It's a 105. Okay, this is the lowest it's ever been. And we expected that because the cards are better than they've ever been because it's all standard cards.
Once again, it's centered around 100. 100 is not the average score of a card that you will draft.
Yeah. It's a card you're offered.
You're offered. So the average score of a card in your deck that you draft is going to be
120.
Like around a 120. So
which means Yeti sucks.
Yeah. So that's the thing. People are just like, oh, okay, so it's above average card. No. Because it's not about what you're offered. It's about what's actually in your deck, right? So every time you draft a Yeti, you're losing 15 points of value.
That's a lot. It's also
that's a lot.
Exact. Like the ratios are exact. So losing 15 points of value is like losing 15% of all of your value. That's a lot to lose on a card.
Yeah.
Like we have a almost absolute zero. It used to be an absolute zero. We fudged with it a little. Now it's a pretty much an absolute zero. But it's close to it. So you're losing about 15% value when you take a Yeti over the average card.
And I think everyone like identifies this, and it makes sense because cards are either supremely overstated, has a unique effect that is just really good even in the arena, has synergy that just works now because synergies are a real thing. And Yeti, with its just very fair stats, don't do anything. That's really a general rule that we can follow. If it's just a fair card, it's a bad card. That's it.
Yep. And more than just the card values being high, which adds to the swing itself is high, right? Twin Tyrant isn't just a really, really good card. It's a card that swings the board from your opponent has the board to you definitively have the board. It's stuff like that. Like Rap Golem causes a huge swing. If you can't remove that thing, it repeatedly generates 1/1 taunts that taunt so that it's even harder for you to remove it. And it's just generating extra card advantage and extra stuff and preventing your face from being hit and extending the game. So stuff like that is not like just a really powerful card, but on top of it, they're designed to be more swingy than just like, let's say, an example of a not as swingy, really ridiculous card is like, I don't know, like a 6 mana 12/12. Like, it's pretty swingy, but it's not that swingy as like a Twin Tyrant or something. So yes, I am saying a Twin Tyrant is worse for the game than a 6 mana 12/12. And that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with right now in neutral, so every class has access to it. And what high swing means for how you play is, one, high swing is effectively more RNG, because you can't always control the swing. It means on a per-game basis, RNG has a larger factor, so skill has a smaller factor. RNG being who meets the conditions of the swing, like, because you can't always prevent that, like see Twin Tyrant. Who gets offered these really good high swing cards to begin with. Some people are going to get offered more than others, and the more variance there is in this, the bigger of a problem there is. So like it's overall bad for skill, and it's overall also bad for curve, because curve has a set amount of swing. If your Yeti eats a 4/4, you get a 4/1. That's your swing. Your Yeti has done its job. It has won the curve battle, and you have a 4/1 on the board on turn 4 or 5 or whatever. It doesn't change. Like, you can have better curve cards. That just gives you a higher percent chance to get that extra value by winning the board battle on that mana turn, if you have it. It doesn't get you extra from it. Whereas a swing, like Twin Tyrant, that has no conditions, just like gets you a ton more extra stuff. So the more swing that exists in the game, the less important curve is, because the curve just doesn't get you as much advantage as you used to. Curve advantage is stable. Making better curve cards does not give you more swing. It gives you a higher chance of getting the same amount of swing. Okay, so that's just a a fundamentals like card game kind of thing. And so that's why swing's so bad. It creates more RNG and it makes the bedrock of arena, right? Your like turn by turn progression less important to who wins the game, and it puts more importance on who lucks out and gets the good cards, and draws the good cards, right? You can have it in your deck, doesn't do anything unless you draw it. Okay, so highest swing ever. That's going in. Next, this is what we're talking about. The next point that I have here is that the curve is actually very strong. If you look through all the cards that are here, it's not just Twin Tyrants and Rat Golems. You have your Hedge Clan Hogsteeds, right? You have your a whole lot of 1-mana cards now, 1-mana neutral cards, Guardian Augmerch, Rocket Augmerch, Ethereal Augmerch, that are all in. You have your Bone Truer Brawlers, Rustworn Initiates, Morag Artificers. On 2, you have your Frozen Shadow Weavers, your Overconfident Orcs, you have your Burrowing Scorpids, Disguised Wanderers on 4. Like, there's a lot of really good curve cards here. And from not even just Ashes of Outlands, but from earlier sets, like History Buffs, Candle Takers, Nephroset Ritualists, right? Like, there's a lot of good curve cards. At 2, at 3, at 1, at 4, it's everywhere. There's not like a power turn. 3 is a little bit more powerful than other turns in this meta, but not enough that you should pay too much attention to it. So there is a very strong curve going on. But like we were talking about before, curve is just going to matter less because we are seeing the highest swings that we have ever seen. And when you swing that hard, your stable curve swings that you were using to get ahead by like a few extra stats, like an extra card, like they just don't do that much anymore. So you can lose the board, lose the curve, and come back much easier. That's a positive element of design. The negative elements of the design is for swing is what I was talking about before. You want to talk about curve?
Yeah, this is one of those things where so curve is important until it meets with stuff that is way too powerful, right? And I think one of the important points that you pointed out is that there is no power turn. Every turn has some really good stuff to it. We've had metas before where the game doesn't start until 3, and then once people figure that out, you can react accordingly. So what this means is, look, stats still matter. Like, I don't want people to listen to this and think, okay, stats literally don't matter at all. No. Like, no matter how swing it is, stats still matter to some degree. Tempo still matters to some degree. But the chances of that incremental tempo that you gained from playing good minions, making good decisions from turns 1 to 5, they don't matter as much. And your win percentage after turn 5 is not as high as in previous metas. But you just have to recognize that. You have to play smart and know that at any given moment, depending on the class, you have to play around certain very powerful clears, very powerful neutral clears as well. So I don't want people to think that none of it matters anymore and you just flip a coin at the very beginning.
No, it matters.
Yeah, it matters. But yeah, it is. For those of you guys who just want to grind it out and get those incremental advantages in the early turns and have that always mean something, that's not going to happen. It'll mean something like a decent amount of time, but it won't always mean something.
And from a game design perspective, you don't want it to always be definitive, right? Like, you guys all remember, or not all, but those of us who were here from earlier on in Hearthstone's life cycle, you remember the GVG meta. That was like when curve was the most important that it has ever been. And nobody liked the GVG meta. It was kind of like whoever has the curve wins, and whoever didn't have the curve lost, and whoever had a curve that also had a buff, like Paladin or Priest, won even harder, and the other people can't do anything about it. And it was not fun, because it's not skill to have a curve, right? It's luck to have a curve too. So it's skill on how you trade in the curve, but just like it's luck to have those big cards, it's also luck to have drawn the cards that are your curve, right? So you want some balance in the middle. And at least for me, I think that balance was achieved a little over a year ago before they did wild rotation. And I think that they've been messing with it since then, since the year the dragon has started, and it has definitely gone way too far in the other direction. Of just what's the point of playing the first few turns, right? Like you're doing stuff, it's not mattering that much. And to Blizzard's credit, in recognition of that, I think not necessarily from an arena perspective, but just generally where the game goes, they've added 3 very powerful 1-drops that are common and neutral in this set. And I don't know if any of those are usable and constructed, but they're going to have huge arena impacts.
I think one of the areas where Blizzard started messing up was, okay, even if you decide to make the ultimate decision, yes, we want to make the game more quote unquote exciting by making it swingier, at least make it different for each class. At least make it such that every time you play a different class, you are sort of trying to anticipate. Like, if you give, flame strike level cards to everyone, for example, like Priest had Dragonfire Potion, right? Or Light Bomb or something. Like, these are very good. But mages have flame strike. Priests have Dragonfire Potion. Warlocks have Twisting
Merps,
Nether.
Who has Twin Tyrant?
Well, let me tell you, everyone, and even if they don't have it, they will from their Dragon Discovers. And if they have 2, now they have 4. So that's
I don't think you're right. It's the correct answer is everyone except for you.
Oh, that's true.
Everyone else has Twin
Never
Tyrants.
Lucky.
I'm not even kidding. I've gone 4 runs in a row without being offered a Twin Tyrant.
That's really the problem with these sort of swing cards. It's like, is it still bad if every class has huge amounts of swings? Yeah, like you said, we have too much of it right now. There needs to be a happy medium between the most Hearthstone meta and what we have now. But it's also, even if we kept the same amount of swing as we have right now, if you gave every class a different class-specific type of big swing or multiple types of swings, at least it makes the games feel more different, right? Like, here's the thing. I troll a lot in like other people's channel now, and one of my favorite phrases is KEKW, Twin Tyrant Simulator. But it's kind of true. You're just playing Twin Tyrant Simulator, and it's like, look, if you keep the swings the same, but you just made it different, right? Like, is it still going to feel bad getting Flame Striked, getting Twisting Nethered, getting Light Bomb / Dragonfire Potion? Yeah, it still feels bad, but at least these have different mana costs, have different play around, come out on different turns, so it just feels different. You getting Twin Tyranted on 8 by every class in every game just feels bad. It just really, really feels bad. Yeah. So that's one of those problems with it. And hey, Twin Tyrant is here to stay. So we're still going to see it. But from a design perspective, this is something that has been really frustrating, I feel, for a lot of players. And it's something that really started when Blizzard said, yeah, we're going to create these swings, but didn't just give unique swings to unique classes. And said, yes, Primordial Drakes are fine, Twin Tyrants are fine, these are all fine.
Yep. It started way back. I think they stepped their toes in it with Eccentric Scribe. And then they were Rap Golem, and then they were Twin Tyrant and all his buddies. And it kind of went really downhill. So, I mean, we're talking about the overall meta, right? The wild rotation coming in is a standard rotation that's coming in for this next one. But there will not be an additional Twin Tyrant problem. There is just the existing Twin Tyrant problem. That's actually not going to be as bad, because Twin Tyrant, for the freaking first time ever, is going to lose its offering bonus. So you're going to see less Twin Tyrants. And the offering bonus, I think, was 50%.
Is going to make it even more painful when you get hit by 3 in one game.
Yeah, so you're going to see less Twin Tyrants by at least 1/3. So it's going to be probably minus 40%, maybe even, because some other the Ashes of Outland cards are going to get the offering bonus. So it's going to dilute the Twin Tyrants even more. So yeah, it's we talk about it, but it's still going to be the highest swing meta ever, just because it's not just Twin Tyrant that's the problem, right? Your Rap Golem is also a problem, your Eccentric Scribe is also a problem. Okay, so yeah, so curve. There's a very strong curve, but don't let that deceive you. This is not going to be a meta determined by curve. And one more reason this is not going to be a meta determined by curve is going to be because this meta is going to have an insane amount of taunts and heals. The most amount of taunts and heals we've seen. I don't think it's going to be more than the other metas where we had the most amount of taunts and heals. We've had a number of metas, like going back 2 years ago and 3 years ago, that had a lot of taunts and heals. And we know how that feels. And we're back. And I don't just mean the availability of heals. I'm just go over like a short list of neutral cards that have taunts or heals and that are like rated by us to be above average, like above a 120. Um, Hippogriff, Bone Wraith, Rusteed, Karkut, Defender, Safeguard, Violet Warden, Rap Golem, Bone Chewer, Scrapyard, Evasive Dragon, and Rap Golem. All those are 4 mana or above. They all taunt for a lot. They're all very good cards. Some of them heal and taunt, some of them just taunt. Either way, starting on turn 4, you're going to start getting stopped. And then all throughout the rest of the game, your opponents are going to keep top decking strong, neutral, taunt, and or heals. So what this means is that any aggressive strategy, I'm not gonna asterisk this at all. Any aggressive strategy will not work. Aggro in the next expansion is entirely dead. So Merps, being one of the biggest defenders of aggro play, how do you feel about these new cards and this new meta that's coming in?
Well, battlegrounds, here I come. Here's the thing, right? Like it's at any given moment, Blizzard can change it because there are adjustments. I'm gonna call them adjustments because I used to call them micro adjustments. They are anything but micro adjustments. They can change at any point with adjustments. Blizzard literally determines what the meta is going to be. We can talk about what the meta is supposed to be with like an offering bonus to the new sets and everything else sort of being standard, like being they are what they are. But yeah, if we just extrapolate based on what we've seen, the sets, the new cards, and everything, it's going to be really, really hard because here's the thing. Part of the reason aggro was good in certain metas was because there were dominant control classes, and in order for them to out card advantage the others, they started this arms race, and then what ended up happening was the best control decks were so greedy and so finely tuned that they definitely had some ways to come back, but you could get under them by going super fast, like ridiculously fast, such that even their sort of protective measures just were not enough. Their AoEs were not enough. That on average, they didn't draw enough of them. They didn't draw enough taunts. So remember, when I loved playing Aggro Hunter, Tar Creeper was still in the meta. Warpath. This is when this was when warriors were at their peak. So it doesn't really matter, kind of like you don't need example for warlocks to be at the top of the meta in order for you to go aggressive. But you just need the right condition. And as of right now, if we assume an offering bonus to the new sets, if we're assuming that these cards are what they are in their current state, like not adjusted in some crazy way, you just never get there because what is happening is decks aren't control anymore. They're card advantage with initiative. So when aggro really works is when decks are control. No one has to go control anymore because cards don't get used up. Every single card generates other cards, as we've seen in Descent of Dragons. If you're not drawing a card, you're generating more stuff onto the board, such that like we've broken the rules of Hearthstone in that way. So this is why, in its current state, unless Blizzard does something crazy, especially with the Demon Hunters. If they like significantly alter the offering rates of Demon Hunter, maybe aggro can thrive. But as of right now, if these classes just draft as they are, it's almost impossible for aggro to consistently thrive. Now, I understand we're saying all of this. Someone's going to come out first day and be like, "Look, I took this like aggro druid, aggro hunter, aggro works." No. It on average will not work as well as some aggro decks will work in certain metas. It just doesn't work by players naturally drafting these good cards that draw other cards that just spit out tons of stats and taunts and everything. They will counter you without even trying to counter you.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what happens when the neutral cards are all taunty, and they're all low mana taunt. Like starting in the mid mana, they start taunting a lot, and then when you get to the higher manas, they not only taunt but also heal, so that you can't even finish them off with your reach that goes through taunts. And that's really like where we have the problem. Like when you have a neutral thing that goes like that, because if you have class cards that are doing the job, you just wait until a particular class is not as powerful that has those cards, or the class that's dominating doesn't have those cards, or they go too slow or something. Here, they can go all as slow as they want, but they're not going to like let their foot off the pedal on the tempo wise. Remember, it's a very strong tempo meta, so even your defensive tempo is going to be pretty good. A lot of removals, preventing the face damage. It's not a good mix for aggro play. On top of all of this, remember, we are still in a no buckets system. You're just being offered random cards from the whole entire pool of cards. And what that means is if you try to go aggro, or if you try to go control, or if you try to go synergy, if you try to go anything, it's harder. Because you don't get to always select of roughly equal value of a few cards. You're going to be forced into that flame strike when you're a aggressive mage. You're going to be forced into like, I don't know, a solid 2-drop, even if you're trying to not have 2-drops. Like everything's pushed towards the middle by the way the offering odds normally work without buckets, and that also makes aggro harder to build. Like it's harder to build an efficient aggro deck. Just normally, even if the meta trends aggro. So now the meta trends like unwittingly defensive against aggro, and it's harder to build an aggro deck. It's also harder to build a control deck. You're not in a good place for aggro. And even if you're just trying to be like slightly faster mid range or whatever, that's terrible too. You don't want to be fast at all, which is why we are getting to our final point. What we'll call games are long. Long games. We're just going to call long games are long. The games you play will have the longest average turn times, I think, that we have ever seen. It may not be strictly true. I remember there was one meta, I forget which one, but in which like people were milling themselves like a lot. I want to say this was the meta from like almost 2 years ago, like a year and a half ago. So I don't know if it'll be quite that slow, but it will be pretty damn slow. And it'll be pretty damn slow because everyone is unwittingly taunting, unwittingly healing. The curve doesn't matter as much, but it won't be... It may not be as slow as what all this suggests because it also does have the highest swing. And swings end games. So... You're going to, like, it creates really the worst meta, because you're going to have a lot of stuff that normally matters and is indications of skill that don't matter. And then what's going to end the game, it's not even like you get to play out to the very end with all of your cards, right? Because that in some ways actually reduces RNG. Because if you have like good cards, you're much more likely to draw them if you draw your whole deck, right? In fact, you're guaranteed to draw them if you actually draw your whole deck. It actually cuts down on RNG a bit if the games all go to the end of the deck. But if it goes to the end of the deck, but not quite, and instead it ends whenever someone gets a really big swing, that's fully random on when the big swing happens and who gets their big swing conditions first. So games are long. They're going to be definitely on the long side. You're not going to get these kind of swings. Like turn 8 is the Twin Tyrant turn, right? You're not going to get these kind of swings on like turn 5 for the most part, right? So you're at some point turn 8 or after, there's going to be these kinds of big swings, and because of these big swings, the swings get so large that you may actually lose the game because of a big swing or win the game because of a big swing. Whereas the earlier swings can be undone by the later swings. which from a game design perspective, you're keeping the game interesting. Everybody's always in it. But from like a skill perspective, you can do really well and beat your opponent, but everyone's always in it, so they just need one lucky roll, right? Like instead of like them needing to roll consistently 3 6s to beat you if you're in a good position, they just have to roll 1 6. Well, that's going to be much easier, and you're going to lose like exponentially more than in a normal condition. As for practically what you can do about it, just have some card advantage because the games are going to be long. And everybody's all defensive. You're not gonna like get by again doing like curve tempo stuff. Like you need card draw or really large cards or some balance of the two just in your deck. I would say the fastest successful build in this meta is going to be mid-range. Like if you ever find yourself building anything faster than what you would normally in your head think of as standard mid-range, you really have to have your draft all synergized to it. So I'm not saying never build it, but like never try to build it. Like if what you're being offered is like just forcing you down that direction, like I guess it's better than picking a really bad controlled like late mid-range deck with like bad cards that'll get outvalued and out tempoed by your opponents. But at that point you're just like trying to get that like 5 to 7 wins instead of like trying to like actually potentially go for 12 or like a good win rate. I'm saying this from like a 7-win per run like average standpoint.
Yeah. That's basically it. I don't think there's much more to be said about like how long games are gonna go. And I see a lot of people remember it's like, oh, we had metas in which like it was dominated by priests, it was dominated by warriors, they went very long. It's the average games, right? Like not all the games during those metas was literally warrior versus priest or priest versus priest. And what happens is just, you're still going to have some fast games. I don't want people to take everything that we say and like extrapolate it to,
this
like,
is just the average
extremes, right? Yeah, this is just the average. So when we say aggro is dead, it's not like dead.
Yeah. Like you could get 5 to 7 wins with a good aggro deck. You can get 12 wins with an amazing aggro deck. But you can also get 12 wins with an amazing any deck.
Yeah.
Like that's so it's just more like there's a huge thumb against you, like bigger than there ever was before. Let's put it that way. So I think this is actually going to be the most anti-aggro meta that we've seen.
If you want to go through all of the ways, and you can remember, it's like, oh, whoa, but those decks were so controlly, right? It's like, oh, those warriors were so controlly, those priests were so controlly. Yeah, but you know what's even better than control? Decks that passively counter aggro by themselves and give you limitless card advantage, right? This is why games are going to go very, very long because everyone is going to passively get stuff that puts them onto the board because that's what they're offered. And then they're going to just passively get stuff that always removes the other person's stuff off of the board. So that's the difference. Like, and on average, games are going to be longer than those, Warpath v Warpath Warrior games because in those games, when it's not stupid Warpath Warrior versus Warpath Warrior, there were games in which one deck quite often didn't have the initiative to stop the other deck from snowballing and rolling through them, right? But now, because there's so much good curve and so much good initiative, it's much easier to create this stalemate from both sides, and for one person to stave off until like turn 12, turn 15, until someone finally breaks through and starts putting pressure on the other person.
Like you were talking about before, right? Whoever draws their Twin Tyrant first. So yeah, in some ways it's not the most different meta from the current meta that we're in right now, but the current meta still has a decent emphasis on curve, and you can get under your Twin Tyrants. Like those strategies do work reasonably well. It's just not it's gonna be bad coming into this next meta. That's not to say like everyone's gonna hate the meta or anything. The new cards are not that terrible, I think. I think that'll be the theme in the next video / next podcast episode / whatever you're viewing this on, whatever medium you're viewing this or listening to this on. But the Ashes of Outland cards are, let's just say, I don't know if it's just an outlier or if it's like just because it's the first set of the year and Blizzard tends to not go crazy on the first set of the year. If you notice, Rise of Shadows neutrals were not as bad as what is it, Saviors of Oldham neutrals, which were again not as bad as Descent of Dragons neutrals. So this may just be, going back to Rise of Shadows level, which honestly feels like it's going back to Rise of Shadows levels. So I'm not saying like Blizzard has a new philosophy on neutrals, but we'll still take it, right? Like it's not another Descent of Dragons neutral set coming in.
So we shouldn't be talking about power creep, it's power plateau.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people are complaining that the power level is already too high. So power plateau doesn't really help those people that are complaining about it. They need a de-ramping, which we definitely don't get.
We are not having a de-ramping.
There's no creep going on. We're not like there are tons of good cards coming in, no doubt about that. But we're not sort of creeping upwards. We're just keeping what it is, which a lot of people don't like. So that's unfortunate.
Okay, so that's the meta preview of Ashes of Outlands, and we will go into specific card valuations after this, starting with neutrals, then going down the classes. A neutral Demon Hunter, then the rest of the classes. Demon Hunter gets extra cards in this set, and there's fewer neutral cards, which again, that's also like an interesting thing, right? We'll talk about it, but there's fewer neutrals, much fewer neutrals than there used to be, because they had to make extra Demon Hunter cards. And I think that's going to impact how much you view this as like this meta as an Ashes of Outlands meta rather than just a Year of the Dragon meta. It's I like my prediction really is that it's going to feel more like a Year of the Dragon meta than it's going to feel like Ashes of Outlands meta. But before we get to it, I want to end this chunk of the analysis with a sort of brief, not too brief, just because it can't possibly be brief, explanation of what numbers you're going to see. So the numbers you're going to see, and how we always do the tier list. For those who've been following us for like 4 years, 5 years, you know that there's an algorithm behind the Lightforge tier list, and that algorithm is constantly being improved, and that in the last, in the last year, I would say, at least the last 3 sets, we've barely like messed with it. Like a new ability will come in and it will just seamlessly integrate into the system. We still have to like put all like inputs in and all that. Like there's still like a lot of work like by hand just to like get all the information that exists into a card into the system. But it's pretty seamless now, which is why we were able to get this with such a short turnaround with the Demon Hunter, the Priest changes, and the new set. And this algorithm is, again, mostly not like almost none of the cards right now are being affected by us in any way. We are just looking to make sure the algorithm is not like bugging out or doing something crazy and the inputs are correct. So we do have to review it, but in the end it's all coming through the algorithm. Like if we can't find something to fix in the algorithm, we just go with its score. And that's because the algorithm is so sophisticated that it is better than any human being on average. Like if the algorithm is wrong, if an algorithm and a human being, like the best player, the best evaluators, disagree on 10 cards, the algorithm is going to be right on more than 5 of them, definitely. So at that point, like we kind of take a back seat. And okay, so just a little bit about what the algorithm is doing. This is not just a simple like how many stats does a minion have? Okay, it's that good. Like this is not what the algorithm is doing. You don't need a complicated algorithm for that. This is one we've been building over 4 years. So it starts out with like what the card does mathematically. Like that's the part that's like this kind of stats, these kind of stat distributions, how the stat distribution matches up with other stat distributions that could be on the board. Like how much is card advantage worth? How much is this type of tempo worth? That type of tempo, reach. Like if I have a Yeti has reach. You don't think of a Yeti having reach, but you put a Yeti on the board, you wait a turn, it's not dead, there's no taunt, it has reach now, right? Like, so that's all being calculated in, which involves knowing, 1, what kind of board the Yeti's coming into, 2, how likely it is to survive for a turn, 3, how much it's going to get, like, potentially taunted or frozen or whatever, like all that stuff. Algorithm has to know all of it. The second big part that gets to it, and that's just the very basics, the second big part that gets to it is stuff like, what are the conditions that you can play a card? Yeti's pretty simple. If you have board space, you can play the card. And the board space limitations. We actually like I really did want to build in board space limitations and like milling cards and stuff like that. But like a year ago, like Blizzard started playing around with this kind of stuff with like Worm and like things like that, and we're like, all right, we got to build this in now. It was way more complicated than it's worth. But there's all this ridiculously complicated things that you're like, why did you even build this in? And it's like, well, that's how the game works. So like a situationalness, like what's a flame strike really removing, right? Like, and when can you play it? And if you play it at certain conditions, it will remove a certain amount of things. You play it in some other conditions, it'll remove some other amount of things. But if you don't play it in certain conditions, it's stuck in your hand for a long time, and all this stuff. It knows all of it. It knows things needs targets. It knows the mana cost of things. It knows the mana cost of other cards in your hands. It knows how likely it is to hit a synergy, whether you wait for the value of waiting for a synergy versus the value of taking a synergy now that's like not as good, or just playing the card without the synergy. And it kind of like plays your hand for you, and it does that for your opponent too. And it knows how all this affects what you do with your hands mathematically. So it has there's a AI basically built into this that's like playing your hand, which it just knows a lot of stuff, which involves also knowing how many hand cards are in your hand, what cards draw other cards to make your hands larger, how much mana cost each of those cards are, and how fast you're playing it out, how long the games go for, and all of that has a probability attached to it, based on all the other cards that are in the pool, which is what you're going to be able to build, right? The kind of decks you're able to build, and also the kind of decks that your opponent's able to build. It's a two-sided street in terms of how long games goes for example. And it also does this, which is what I think a lot of people don't. It's very hard for humans, I think, to really internalize this, but it figures out what the cost is to just have a card in your hand that's like totally unplayable versus like playable but in rare situations versus playable but it's just like bad. Like if I just have like a Wisp, it's always playable, but it's not a terribly good card. I guess Wisp is a bad example because it's 0 mana and it's free. Let's say like a 5 mana 4/4 that doesn't do anything. Like it may be playable because all you need is board space, but you're never gonna want to play it, and so it's basically a dead card in your hand until you're like out of cards. Like that kind of weight in your hand is very different from having a card that is playable. Like if I have a Frostbolt in my hand, I can almost always use a Frostbolt for some gain on like most turns. So even if I don't, and the algorithm knows when you do and when you don't, but it still has value, right? Because it's giving you choices. And the only difference between a good player and a bad player is the choices we make in this game. So
here's the thing. You just said a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I want to put it into a different way. And this is something I specifically asked ADWCTA to add in because obviously we needed more content for these. For
8 hours? Psh, let's make it 12.
Yeah. We obviously need to just fill in the content. But I want to explain it just because throughout the years, this has been like one of those shadowy, cryptic things that, around the arena community, I've heard people saying like, say things from, there isn't really an algorithm. It's just these guys sort of like throwing darts and then make it sound like they have something more than they actually do. We have other people that are just like, wait. But like, no, good players are better than this stupid basic formula that you guys have. And they can't see it. So I understand that criticism. What this does is, and why we believe in the algorithm is such that whenever you're evaluating a card, I'm going to make an analogy to the NBA because I love the NBA. A lot of people take a card just like they take a player to evaluate how good a player is. So we're going to take a player like Stephen Curry. Is Stephen Curry good? Literally every single player, person is going to be like, yes, he's a 5 out of 5, right? Like he's good.
Wait, is
that
his
enough?
name Stephen Curry? It's not Steven?
Oh my God. All right, I'm going to continue on. So is Steph Curry good? Yes, he's good. Is that enough for a lot of people? Yeah, sure, it might be. That's not good enough for us, right? We need to know how good is Steph Curry, and that depends on the other 9 players on the court, right? How good Steph Curry is a reflection of who his teammates are at the time they're on the court, who is on the court facing him, what sets they're running. And how do you know what sets they're running? You don't at that moment. You know the sets, for example, if they're facing like the Grizzlies, you know that the Grizzlies run, a lot of zone defense. It's not every time, but how does Steph Curry do against zone defense? And on average, it's like, okay, well, the Golden State Warriors like to run, double back screens for Curry. And how do the Grizzlies defend that? So
And
these are the
go
things.
one level deeper. How do you know the Grizzlies run zone defense? It's because of the players that the
Mhm.
Grizzlies have available to them, and it's because
Right.
what they anticipate they will face in the NBA. And all of that
So
is what the algorithm is calculating.
So for those of you who just say, okay, I just want to know if a card is good or not good, that's fine. We don't have to go deeper. What we want to do is think, okay, how good is this card slash NBA player within this meta slash the other 9 people on the court by averaging all of the situations and plays that we simulate. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in your deck, but we know, and this is what advanced statistics do with these games as well. In in 100,000 games simulated between the Golden State Warriors and the Grizzlies, for example, how many of these types of plays are going to be run? How much zone defense is Steph Curry going to see? How often is Steph Curry going to be able to get an open corner three? And then how much does that affect? So these are things in which it is necessary to try to pinpoint an exact value of a card or a player, but the human mind is just incapable of doing this.
Yeah,
The human mind just can't factor in all those things at the same time.
and to clarify, for those who are more technical about this, we're not actually using a Monte Carlo on any of this, as the doing simulations things would suggest. It's actually just calculating it.
Yes. Yeah. But I think the analogy helps you guys kind of see. It's like, okay, well, why can't we just take some really, really good players and then be like, okay, how good is this card? A lot of players will be very correct and be like, oh yeah, this is a good card. That's not a good card.
There's also a reason why we don't have a 5-star system, right? Which can just be like good, great, amazing, or like whatever, right? Like that's a good baseline to like, should you pick this card? But that's why we have numbers, and that's also why like whenever something changes, like the meta changes, these numbers are different. Like all the numbers are different. Like Fairy Dragon is never the same number across different meta because it can't be targeted. So how many things that can target it matters.
Yep. So that's an explanation of why we do this the way that we do. Because we want an answer more than just, is this good slash bad, right? Which is funny because we have a segment called Card Good Bad. But when we do these lists, we want to say how good is card X in relation to card Y in relation to card literally every other card in the game. And in order to do that, you need something that goes beyond us just thinking about how good a card is, in this sort of amorphous blob that we can't really figure out. Yeah. So that's how we use it.
It's an interplay between like how good we are evaluating what a card does and like how good the algorithm is at fitting it into the wider ecosystem of the card pool and the meta that the algorithm is not just predicting, but it knows. And of course, the algorithm is not like 100% knowing of the meta because Blizzard does adjust to cards. Like if Blizzard actually gave us the offering rates, the algorithm would know. But Blizzard, like, we know what the offering rates should be, and then we know that Blizzard's going to adjust them somehow. So we're pretty close to what the meta should be in the algorithm, but we're not perfect on there. And it's a lot more complicated to put a card into the system than just saying like it's a Yeti. It is a 4-mana 4/5. Like for a Yeti, it is just that simple. But for a lot of the more complicated cards, like let's say a Guardian Auk Merchant, it does take a good player who also knows how the algorithm works to be able to know what to input into the algorithm to get the results. And so the algorithm knows what this card is actually doing. Okay. So that's a really long-winded explanation for people who don't know what our algorithm does, and we're going to go into what the algorithm has spit out at us in the next episode. And for this one, every single Ashes of Outland card has been algorithmed with the exception of one. You guys can guess which one isn't, but there is one that we just could not do, and so we just threw darts at a wall and picked the number. No, we picked it based on us being good players and how good we think that card is. It is a class card. But all the other ones are algorithmed, and I think Descent of Dragons and Galakron's Awakening were both 100% algorithmed. But yeah, it's anyway. That's it for this episode. Do we have people to thank? I want to thank our patrons. I always want to first thank our patrons when we do one of these card reviews, because they support us throughout the entire year at very regular intervals, and we get more of their money than from Twitch subs. So no offense, Twitch subs, we love you too, but we get less money from you directly because Twitch gets them. Or
All right. So thank you to our top Patreons: 4P, Aaron L, Cheng Yin, Dan F, Eric L, Feldingox, Jordan, Math and Carnage, RV, Night Train, Torjado, and also Yin. Thank you guys for giving us money. We like money.
All right. And also, I want to thank in this very first episode all the people who are supporting us to actually get this piece of it up. That includes our technical director, that's working behind the scenes like many hours and for many years with us to just keep, to actually make the algorithm, and to keep it updated and to get things done on time. It's in such a good shape because he's been doing such a good job at it. And I also want to thank Brand New, because I keep forgetting to thank her. I want to get this out in the beginning because there have been entire review streams where I forget to thank her. She does the art for our tier list, for the new set icons and the highlighting and that stuff. So they all
labor so good you're marrying it.
that's why I put a ring on it for the algorithm work. I mean the tier list work. And I also want to give a shout out to David Attenborough Says, who will be working late night tonight uploading all of this up onto YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, that's his handiwork and on all the thumbnails. And also to Sulin, who's been doing our 12-1 videos. We haven't had a lot of them since we onboarded him because we started playing more Battlegrounds. But now with the arena coming back, and we're gonna play a lot more arenas and hopefully getting a lot more 11 and 12-1 runs on the YouTube. That's gonna pick up as well. And finally, and I say finally, I know I'm gonna forget someone, but I really want to thank all of our mods on Twitch who get no love from us on a daily basis, despite being such a huge help on a daily basis. Every time we stream, just making things running. Like, our mods do more than other mods. We have like t-shirts and like things like that. Like like points tracking. I don't know. They've been with us a long time and they've done a lot for us. And I really want to. I think we should be thanking them like every stream, but it feels weird. So we do it every now and then, but we are always grateful for you guys.
That's it.
All right.
Intro is done.
Next up, neutral cards, your top 13. Until then, this is ADWCTA.
This is Merps, see you guys.